So, obviously, I'm here to talk about portfolios, and you can call them portfolios or call them what you like. Some people will call them your personal website or your web page, homepage, your blog. Whatever way you want to call it. Ultimately, it's just that thing that really showcases your work and what you're able to produce. And I'm a big believer in them. But before really diving into it, I'll start by just letting you know a little bit more about myself and why I am such an advocate for building really awesome portfolios. So I've been a coder for 16 years professionally. I'm one of those kids though who grew up with a computer coding all the time, and so I got to really build my career as like the internet was really taking off and becoming a bigger and bigger thing. And so it was just a really exciting time for me to have been a kid and then grow up into it. And so, it was really a fun thing, but at the same time, I graduated from college without a CS degree. And back then, when I was getting started professionally, that mattered a whole lot more, having that CS degree. If you didn't have one, it meant that you basically had to prove yourself through the experience that you had. And the way that I was able to do that was by building a very strong portfolio. And today, the emphasis is a lot less on having that computer science degree. There's a lot more boot camps around, and it's a lot more common to see, which is great. But still, there's that same kind of emphasis on the experience and the capabilities that people have. And I'd actually also argue that in a lot of ways, we probably expect more out of what a coder or what just general, even if you're not writing code, what people are and what they need to be capable of doing than when I was getting started. Because, back then, there was a lot more focus on what is known as eye-shaped people, just like a vertical line. Because an eye-shaped person, their experience and their expertise is very vertical, and there's a lot of depth to it. It goes, top down. But now there's more of an emphasis on looking for T-shaped people, where you have that vertical depth of knowledge, but there's also that line on the top that gives you more breadth of knowledge, that lets you share your experience and share knowledge and be able to communicate with people in different areas, whether it be UI, UX, or agile project management. And so given that there's this different focus on what an eligible candidate looks like, I'd say that in a lot of ways, maybe the pressures are even higher on job seekers to really sort of set themselves apart. And I think that that's one of the main reasons why portfolios can matter so much. So somewhere along the lines in my career, I shifted from that individual contributor to a manager, and I was leading teams and I was managing them. I was interviewing people, and then I grew into managing managers, and now I oversee multiple teams and multiple products. So in that time span of about 10 years where I've been a manager, I've interviewed hundreds of people. I've hired many, and I've done it at both small companies that are startups as well as big companies that are Fortune 200 companies. So I've been on both sides of the table. And because of that, I wanted to offer really my take on portfolios and what it takes to build a really good one. And what I'm about to cover, being that I'm a coder and software engineer by background, it really still does apply even if you're not a coder. If you're into UI and UX, or you're a data analyst, or cybersecurity, network engineering, whatever it is, I think that there's something that can be said for what a portfolio can do for you when you're seeking a role, either at the junior level or even at the senior level. So whenever you do a talk about portfolios, whenever you talk about why they're important, you get hit with some pretty common questions. So the first one is just being asked whether you really need a portfolio or not. And I won't lie, there's some very different opinions about whether people need them or not. And there's lots of people who land jobs and have their whole entire careers without ever having a portfolio. And some of the most successful people that I know don't have one. And the thing is that I think that having a portfolio is very helpful. And I think that that's the important part. It's not the thing that's going to guarantee you getting a job, but it's something that will help you in your career and help you kind of get noticed by the hiring manager. So I will say that with that in mind, having a portfolio never hurts your chances. I don't think I've ever heard of a single hiring manager said that That candidate is just showcasing who they are with this portfolio, and that's terrible. I don't want to interview them. That never happens. So having a portfolio is not something that's going to hurt you. But on top of that, so I'll kind of share a bit of an anecdote here that a friend of mine, he runs a great live stream called Guidance Counselor 2.0. You should definitely check him out. His name is Taylor Desson. You can follow him on LinkedIn. He goes live every day to really just talk about recruiting, but also connecting with hiring managers. And he really kind of is disrupting that recruiting space. And he's had me as a guest on his show a few times. And one time he was asking me as a hiring manager whether I like to give software engineers take-home assignments to prove their technical ability. So something that just allows them to code something and then turn it back into me so I can review them. And my take on that was pretty much the same as it is today, which is that, if I'm at home and I need a carpenter, and I'm looking at a list of carpenters, when I try to make my decision, it's really through working with them to see what they've done in the past. They usually come to me with portfolio and they show me their experience. I can't go to a bunch of carpenters and say, go and build me a chair, and based on how you build that chair, I'll then decide if I want to hire you or not. And yet we do that with coders a lot, and we do that with different roles as well. And it just doesn't seem to work because you actually end up getting mixed results. Sometimes the person does a great job, but they're not such a great candidate, and vice versa. And it's not a really good or effective way of really measuring the skill set. But like I said, carpenters, general contractors, they come and they show you their portfolios, they show you their body of work, and they talk through what they've done intelligently. They tell you about some of the challenges they face, some of the things that they're very proud of, things that they, materials they use that they didn't know they could use. And it's the same sort of thing with what you should be doing as a portfolio. It's a way to really drive that first impression that forms. And then the next kind of question that I'll often get is, just where do you have the time? How will I ever find the time when I'm trying to find a job? And that means preparing for interviews, writing my resume and tweaking it and updating it and uploading it to a website where then I have to go and manually enter it in all over again. And then just doing technical coding prep or other challenges like take home work. And then, maybe you're wrapping up a capstone or you're working on other projects. So where do you find the time to actually build a portfolio? And in all of the portfolios I've reviewed over the years, I've started to realize that I think too many people overthink and over-engineer and overbuild what they think their portfolio needs to be. So that's one of the things I want to dive into. I'll say, and this comes with no exaggeration, that I think that a great portfolio can actually be built in 2 days, and hopefully you'll start to see why I think that's possible in a second. And then there's the all-important question of, what do you put on a portfolio, right? What is the kind of stuff that needs to be there? So I'll start, before really getting into that part, to just say that I'm a big believer in both agile and lean principles. I kind of try to apply them in, just in work, but also in my life. If I'm cleaning the house, I try to see if there's a way where I can do it agile. But I think it provides a great framework. I think, especially when it comes to building portfolio, I think that it really focuses on the right kind of stuff, and it offers a very clear perspective of how you should build them. And part of that also means that it shouldn't be something that takes a long time, and it shouldn't be something that requires a lot of maintenance from you. And so that's where, being able to build it in 2 days is really key. So I'm going to summarize all those principles of lean and agile into 3 key statements that really sort of capture what I want to focus on. First off, you want to maximize the value, delivering the most value to the end user. You want to minimize the overall effort. Don't over-engineer, don't overbuild. And, if you're building a portfolio, maybe you want to build like a full stack MVC type app with a database backend, but I'll argue that that's probably overkill for what it needs to be. And then lastly, focus on the customer. So when you're focusing on the customer and you're thinking about a portfolio, or you're thinking about your resume even, those 2 questions are really, or the thing behind that is, who's the customer in that case? Well, in this case, it would be the hiring manager. It would be me. Your resume, your portfolio, those are products. And so if you think about that end user as a customer, this whole talk, this whole thing about why portfolios matter and why resumes should be get the attention they deserve is really just a matter of understanding what your customer needs out of you and what is the requirements they have. And so this is just, think of this all as customer research and requirements gathering at the end of the day. So with that in mind, thinking of the hiring manager as your customer, think about them in terms of the problems that they face. So for junior roles or for entry-level roles, especially for coders, but I've seen it in different roles as well, you typically get a large stack of resumes, and it's not really a physical stack. It might be emails, it might be applications online, but you can get as much as 200, sometimes more, depending on the size of your organization. And that's a lot. It's overwhelming to have to go through that many applications. And there's a lot of pressures because you want to make that selection of the candidates pretty quickly. You want to find the best possible candidate. And it's just a challenging thing to do. And I'm not trying to offer that up as an excuse. I'm not asking for any sympathy, but I think it's just important to know the frame of mind of the hiring manager so that you can make good decisions about really both your resume and your portfolio. So going back to that first question of whether a portfolio is needed or not, I don't think that that's really the right question. It's not, do you need a portfolio? It's really more about how do you set yourself apart from all the other candidates in a stack of 200? Because think about those 200, right? Where would you even begin if you had to review 200 applicants effectively in a short time frame? And that happens for everyone, juniors and seniors, wherever you are in your role, you end up sending your resume, you apply online, and it goes into this weird void of a black hole. And sometimes you never get a response. Hopefully you do, but sometimes you don't. And if you don't, it's likely just because that hiring manager is overwhelmed. They don't have an effective system to review that many applications. It just doesn't scale. And so that's the problem that you're faced with. And if you think about it, even if you spend 5 minutes just reviewing every application, that amounts to about 2 full days of doing nothing else but reviewing applications. And then when you factor in, meetings and just general other work that a manager has to do, it can sometimes take 2 weeks, more than that, if you're just going through them one at a time. And so then they start cutting corners and they start to say, well, maybe as I review them, if I find people that I like, I'm just going to start calling them. And that can mean that you never get through everyone in the full stack. And that's not the best way to go around it. And then there's, obviously some different approaches that people might take, where maybe they'll do a quick pass of all of them to really kind of categorize and prioritize them. And then of the ones that are in the first stack, they'll then go through and review in more detail. And some people will leverage software to optimize how they're reviewing candidates. But, as the hiring manager, often the things that you're looking for right away when you're going through a resume is just to simply look at, if it's a coding role, do they have the languages that I need them to know for this role? Have they structured the resume so that I quickly get a sense of what experience they have, either professional based or project based? And how many years experience do they have? Do they have a GitHub? Do they have a portfolio? Those kinds of questions. That's sort of like the framework that you start to build in your mind, just so that you can get through the volume of work, right? And so I'm saying all this stuff so that I want to really capture the challenge on the other side of the table, where the hiring manager is just trying to figure out how they can get the best candidate possible. And the better you know how they're thinking, the better you can kind of, stand out to them. So, this is obviously a talk about portfolios, and I want to focus on portfolios, but I'll just immediately talk a bit about resumes, because I think that that's the first step towards getting to the portfolio. So the best thing that I like to suggest in terms of resumes is just to think about them as recipes. I can spend probably a whole hour talking about resumes alone, but I do want to get to those portfolios. So if you think about a resume just really briefly as a recipe, recipes, the reason why they work so well is because they're very structured information, right? They always talk about the preparation time and the cook time and the serving size and all the ingredients, and then they cover the steps to actually produce whatever that recipe is producing. And that's helpful because if you're looking to make something and, a recipe calls for apples and you don't have apples, you can quickly make that determination that that's not a recipe you can use. And it's important for resumes to have that kind of structure, because you want to make sure that you're focused on the right stuff and highlighting the right kind of information. And a lot of people like to take more of an unstructured approach. They might use a lot of design elements to make their resumes stand out, but oftentimes that can work against them because it makes it harder to find the really important information. So don't think of your resume as this goal to serve you as both your professional experience or your project experience and also your portfolio. Let the resume showcase your professionalism. Keep it to one page, highlight your wins, but then use your portfolio to show how you get creative. Last bit I'll quickly say before I move on from this slide is that if you like pancakes like me, this is my recipe for making some killer pancakes. I call them my keep your kids at home pancake because I live in terror that one day my kids are going to grow up and they'll leave me. But I think if I can make some awesome pancakes, then maybe they'll stay home a little longer. So I'm happy to share that pancake recipe if you like. But let's start with the basics then about let's start with what the portfolio should be, right? So your portfolio shouldn't be just like this online version of your resume. That's not really all that useful. And if you're a coder, it shouldn't really reflect your GitHub either, because those are two different things. So think of your resume and your GitHub as these two extremes. So your resume is that professional you, and your GitHub is that technical you. It shows you, it shows people what you're capable of, and in a very technical sense in terms of the code that you write and how you structure your code. And it should be focused entirely on code. But your portfolio is sort of like that midpoint. It's that translation from going from your resume to your GitHub. And so as a customer, when I look at portfolios, I'm really thinking about them from three different angles. And so I'll, being someone that loves Agile, I'll present these kind of three reasons as user stories. So thinking about the customer, thinking about the hiring manager as a customer, here are the three main user stories behind it. One, as a hiring manager, I want to see that I want to see how a candidate communicates so I can assess how well they prioritize information, and in an open-ended format. So not something structured like a resume. Next, I want to see updates. I want to get a sense of how a candidate is able to grow and progress and what they've done in terms of their own investment in themselves. And then lastly, I like to find out about a candidate's overall just personality so that I can assess their overall team fit and their cultural fit within the rest of the organization. So those are the main three kind of like user stories to think through as you then go and build your portfolio. Well, let's dive in a little deeper. So that first story, how does a candidate communicate so that I can assess how they prioritize information in an open-ended format, right? So communication, that's notoriously challenging. And there's so much that you can show, so much that you can tell about your individual projects. And so really what I'm looking for is, what is the information that you're prioritizing? Do you show the tech stack that's involved? How do you structure and lay out all that information? And it doesn't have to be this boring, dull thing. But the question comes back to, what are you highlighting for each of those projects? And it's a very important skill set because effective communication is such an important aspect to an agile team. Remember, that's the T-shaped person, right? You want to not only just have a person who has a lot of depth to their experience, but a lot of breadth, and that can effectively work with other people. So then the second one is, again, the updates, right? So a lot of people think that, like I said earlier, their site has to be this super complicated website where it's very dynamic and loads information from a database, and it really doesn't need to be. You don't ever want to set the effort bar so high that you can never maintain that website, because that then kind of works against the whole purpose of it. So this whole user story, it's about updates and what you can highlight with those updates. So again, think agile, think lean. How can you minimize your overall effort? And you don't need to have like a full blog where you're writing these really long articles. Instead, you can think about it as like microblogging, Twitter style kind of updates, right? Maybe you just picked up a new book that's technology focused. Maybe you came across an article and you just thought it was really interesting, wanted to share. Maybe you just put something up on CodePen, whatever it might be. Even just having a single line that has a timestamp can do a lot of information, or can do a lot of good. And I'll cover why in a little bit, but it'll give you a bigger sense of just the fact that that person is maintaining their portfolio and they're staying up to date on stuff. And, incidentally, actually, I'll mention, so I post a lot on LinkedIn. We were talking a little bit earlier about a post I made that has gone viral, which was really interesting for me because I've never had that happen before. But I post a lot on LinkedIn, and just recently, a couple of weeks ago, I found I came to the realization that LinkedIn is a bit of a black hole for a lot of the stuff that I post, because you post it and then a week or two later, it's kind of gone. It's hard to go back and retrieve old posts. And some of those posts I'm actually pretty proud of. And, the challenge there is that I lose sight of those things. And so I spent a weekend where I went back and I grabbed all of my old posts over a period of 4 years. And I took those posts and I actually just moved it to my own personal blog so that I can keep them. And it's more for myself. And then I started looking at old files that I have, some that are 20 years old, code that I wrote in high school. And I'm sharing all this because not only does this show your progression for the hiring manager, but it also is really motivating for yourself when you have a sense of where you were when you first got started to where you are today. So you don't need to just track this stuff for my benefit. You'll really, it'll be great to have that own kind of like record for yourself to see what you've done and what you've accomplished. Okay, and then the final user story. So that's the team fit, the cultural fit. So, that's where your personality, that's where what your portfolio looks like and what kind of information you communicate. That's where it's really going to start helping. So talking about yourself and, really just even the design that you pick and, are you a minimalist or are you analytical and data driven? Those kinds of things will help me form an impression of you that will help you out in the end. It might seem a little fluffy to talk about personality, but at the end of the day, people like working with people that really contribute to the culture of the team. And that's an important aspect. And the cool part about having a really dynamic and engaging portfolio is the fact that it lets you as the candidate control the conversation. Because my first impressions are not being formed by a conversation we're having, it's by the information that you're presenting to me, and it's one way. So how you structure things is really going to let you formulate my first impression of you. So those are all the main things. And I saw there's a question about an example portfolio, so I'm about to get into that right now. So let's think about what all those three things, what does it actually end up looking like? So this is an example that I put together. And it's, pretty simple, bare bones layout and structure. Don't get too focused on the actual design, but think about the elements that you're seeing here and why this speaks to a hiring manager. Because if you're looking at this, you're seeing all the information that you're looking for right away. I'm seeing the languages, which is really helpful because first and foremost, I want to know that they have those technical skills that I'm hiring for. But I'm also seeing other information, like I'm seeing, a little bit of a bio about who they are. I'm seeing this summarized information about how many years coding and how many years you've been employed as a coder, any contract work that you've done, contributions to open source work. Those kinds of things speak a lot to hiring managers because it gives you a quick sense of, the fact that you contribute to the community and you're outwardly focused. And then with the projects, it shows a lot of forward thinking in terms of not just being a description about the project, but you're also listing the technologies involved, and you've got a link to a hosted website. You also have a link back to the GitHub. And then, like I said, that time-stamped based information, right? This section on the left here where it says, here's what I'm currently working on, here's what I've currently read. And these kinds of things, it should not require a lot of effort. This shouldn't be the type of thing where you're updating this daily or weekly. If you're doing that, you're doing too much. Remember to minimize your effort, maximize the value. I'm not, as a hiring manager, looking at someone's website every single day, so I'm not going to notice a new project get added. But if I see something with a timestamp on it and I see it's only a couple of weeks old, that's great. And so, this kind of thing can really help a hiring manager find the most important information quickly. One other thing that I'll say, because I've seen some people do this, is they get really ambitious and they use a lot of very dynamic animations for a lot of their content, and that's great. You can definitely use animations, but where you should not use it is for information that really matters. So for example, I've seen cases where with these languages, React, C#, JS, people have animated those to fade in and fade out, and it cycles through, so they only show one at a time, which, if you think about your customer who wants to just know what languages you know and wants to be able to see it quickly so that they can form an opinion and move you to the top of the stack, if they're having to sit there and wait to see every single language and 20 different languages and they're looking for one specific one, that can be a very challenging experience. And so don't do that. And in fact, if you use like the the icons that you'll see for like HTML5 and CSS and all of the other languages always include a text label with them, because the key thing is that if I'm searching for text, if I don't know the icon, or if I'm not familiar with it, or if it just changed or whatever, that text is going to be able to, stand out a lot more to me than that icon will. So let's, think a little bit longer about what it would actually take to maintain a site like this. And arguably, I'd say it's very little, because you don't need to put up a database backend to drive the content on this. This can be a static HTML page. If you just read a new book, you can go into the HTML and add a new table row or a new div. Same thing with a new project. You can go and just manually update that HTML code, and you don't have to overthink it. And that makes it very, very easy to update, very, very easy to maintain, and the effort level is pretty low. And last bit I'll say before moving on from the slide is, always remember, think about agile principles and lean principles. And one of those is have incremental updates, right? You don't need to have a very rich portfolio day one. Having a portfolio is better than not having one. So do the lowest level effort, smallest lift, get something up there, and then add to it over time as you have either more projects or you do something that you really want to showcase on there. But at a bare minimum, if you were to start building this out, this is something that you can get done in a couple of days, and this alone would be huge for a hiring manager to see. So I'm going to actually now go into some real examples. So I've got a few in different role categories. So this one's for developers, and this is a real developer. He's based out of the UK. I came across his portfolio and I asked him for his permission to share this because I really like his portfolio. So this is the first page that you see when you land on his website. And, it's just a very short introduction, not really a ton of words, but you can instantly see the languages. He's using the icons, but he actually has the text labels further down, so it's easy to find them. But then he has the links to really the most important things that I'd otherwise want to see after projects, right? It's GitHub, LinkedIn, and a link to download his resume. But then if you were to scroll down, you start to see his projects. And James wrote some fantastic write-ups about his projects, especially when you look at the GitHub, what he kind of covers, it's fantastic. But even on his portfolio alone, it gives you a very quick idea of what he's done here. He's got the languages involved, the overall tech stack. He's got links to the code to the live site. But then if you read this paragraph, and I don't know if you can, if it's too small, I apologize, but that last sentence that he has in that paragraph is fantastic. He says, this led to an investigation into WebRTC, which from my perspective, it means that he started on a project, he came across something, and he started to research and learn. So here's a project that he learned from. And I love seeing that. I love seeing how someone has progressed and grown as they took on a project. And if I scroll down to the next one, the next project that he has is one that is a portfolio. It's actually basically his website. And this is huge for me because this tells me that it's kind of very meta, but it's showing me that James is actually thinking very much about who his audience is. He's not building a website for friends. He's not building a website for a gaming website. He's building it to land himself a job. And so he's using his own portfolio as a way to showcase his skills, and he's showing it as part of his projects. And I think it's very, very intentional. And I think it's the right move because it's showing me the way he thinks and the fact that he's very customer focused. Then he's got a quick about me section. And, it tells me a fair bit about him. But one of the things I'll call out on this page is the fact that, again, it shows a lot of intentionality, because if you're as a user scrolling and you come down to this page, maybe at this point you want to see his GitHub or his LinkedIn, and there's links there to it. So it shows that he's actually thinking about how the user will be when they're down this far below, that they can easily get to those links again. And then lastly, he just covers, the current role that he's in, how he's growing, and all the languages listed with more details. And now the only thing that that is missing from this is that I don't have an immediate way of knowing whether this site is active or not, right? If you were to look at this, it says that he's roughly a junior JavaScript developer, but what if this website is 5 years old? And what if he's a senior now? What if he's not actively looking? What if he gave up on coding at all, and he's, you know, gone into a completely different industry. There's no real way for me to determine that or assess that. And so that is the one thing that I would pick out from this, to say that the easiest way to solve this is if there was a single line with a timestamp that said, you know, I just read this book, or I just, you know, did this, whatever it would be, that one timestamp will tell me that all this information is up to date. So that's the one thing that I'd say is to keep in the back of your mind. So now let's go to a UI UX / product owner. So full disclosure, Hannah is actually someone that I interviewed and I hired for our product owner role. And I think she's fantastic. And I want to cover basically her portfolio, because I think it covers a lot of really, really valuable information here. So again, you land on this page and it's just a short bio with links to things that matter from a hiring manager's perspective. But then you scroll down and, you know, not being a coder, she doesn't need to get into the technical aspects, but she shows some of the projects that she's worked on. And so you start to get an experience or a sense of her experience. You click on one and it goes into a lot of information. And this, you know, it covers quite a lot, and I can't show it all on just one slide, but, you know, very quickly you're seeing how she thinks through problems, how she covers her personas, and she does her market research and wireframing, all of this stuff. If you think back to what I was saying earlier about that carpenter who shows up with a portfolio of all their work, this is very much that same kind of idea. You know, I'm seeing exactly both that depth and the breadth of the knowledge. And I've not even interviewed Hannah at this point, right? All I've seen is a resume, and then I've seen this. And I'm thinking quickly that this person might be at the top of my list, right? And no joke, that was exactly my impressions when I landed on this. Was I saw exactly the way that she thinks through things. I saw the method behind everything, and I knew that she'd probably be one of the people that I would definitely want to talk to, and most likely be the one that I would hire. And then one other final example for anyone who's either in cybersecurity or, you know, more hardware engineering, network engineering, that kind of stuff. And this is a bit more of like a specialist type of portfolio website. So Michael Horowitz, he is like an industry veteran. He's not someone who's actively trying to look for a job and get his foot in the door because he's got a lot of clout. But I wanted to showcase this because, you know, you don't expect people in cybersecurity or network engineering or any of those kind of more inward and back-end kind of areas to really be focused on design and user experience. And that's not the importance of what he's providing. He's providing a depth of knowledge around the industry trends. If you have certifications, this is an opportunity to put those certifications up on the website. But what I'm seeing here is just how much Michael knows about cybersecurity, right? It's just a lot of different blog entries and talks that he's done or things that he's attended and different things like that. And, you know, if you're starting your career off and you've not written 20 articles, that's perfectly okay, but you can link to articles that you've read, maybe have a comment or two about them, but just showing that you are up to speed on what's going on. Those are the things that matter. And that's where the portfolio would look entirely different, because it's a lot harder to create a project around those areas, but this shows the ways in which you think about those kinds of things. All right, so I'm just going to quickly have a lightning round of last little tidbits of stuff to share. So, you know, one, you know, if cost is ever a consideration, you can use dedicated hosting. It's fairly inexpensive now, but there's also places like github.io where you can host personal sites. And then at the bare minimum, if you are a coder and you have a GitHub, you should definitely build out your GitHub profile page, because a lot of people just leave it blank. And you know, this is probably in if you don't have a portfolio, just at least do this, because you can then link to that at the very minimum. And otherwise, you know, you don't need to have a custom domain. Also, those are fairly inexpensive, but, you know, costs can sometimes be a prohibitive factor. So if you don't need to go have one, there's definitely places that will give you kind of more generic names, but it is a nice touch if you can't afford it. So I definitely encourage it if you're in a position to actually be able to get one. And if you have a custom domain, you should definitely use it for your email address, and you can set it up to just forward to your Gmail or your personal email. But it just is, again, a nice little touch. That's about it. I'll just quickly otherwise say, I having had the experience that I've had, having had the benefit of people giving me the benefit, not having a CS degree and having to prove myself, and having people take a chance on me. I've always wanted to pay it forward to others who have been and will be in the same kind of boat. So I have, made a fair bit of content to help those folks out. You're more than welcome to check it out. You'll find it on my website. It covers a lot of different things like resumes. There's a resume template that you're welcome to use, or just use to kind of get an idea of how to structure information. You don't have to use the template itself, but there's a lot of different resources there. And lastly, I also have a YouTube channel where I focus more on different aspects of the role, both as a manager, but also just as someone in technology. Some of it's coding related, and some of it's just more generally just being someone in tech. So I hope you'll check it out, and I will happily answer any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. We really appreciate it. And again, we're going to be sending out these slides. So you're going to have all of the contact information here, but I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. We did have some questions pop up. So I'll just start off from the ones in the top. So do you have any thoughts on following up on applications and the best practices that you might recommend?
Yeah, I think, it depending on the company, it can be difficult if it's like just a impersonal website where you've just uploaded your resume. But I think if you have a connection into the hiring manager or the recruiter, that might be an HR person, you should absolutely follow up. I think there's a lot of reasons, forgivable reasons, why people can't get back to people as quickly as possible. And sometimes it can be as innocent as they just accidentally, their finger hit the delete key and maybe they lost your information, but they really liked you and they have no way of recovering your name. You always approach it with the assumption that they had their best intentions in mind, and, just kind of bump up into their inbox and say, hey, I wanted to check in. I'd say that usually give it about 2 days. And if they don't give you a timeline, then go with 2 days. But a fair ask is to say, do you know when I would be hearing back, or do you know when you might have a decision made? But I would definitely err on the side of communicate and be proactive, because that's an appreciated quality. It's not, no one's sitting there going, this person's reaching out to me too much. And if they do feel that way, their response is more likely going to be, we're probably not going to have a decision until this day. And so that way they're giving you an informed, or they're giving you the information you need so that you know when to then follow up next.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I do want to let everybody know that that is also a service here at Emeritus. It's the team that I'm on, the employee relations team. And our role is to help make relationships and connections with employers such as so that we're able to refer your resume over. So we want you to work with our career coaches. If you don't already, please let us know in the chat. We'll get you a link. We'll set you up with a personal career coach so that we can try and help you with your job search, and let you know if we can send your resume over and do some follow-up for you. So please do let us know in the chat box if that's something you're interested in. We can get that link for you. So, second question, do you have any advice as to the best way to get a job as a coder without any experience? So they're seeing that most entry-level jobs still seem to require experience, but it's entry-level and they might not have that experience. So kind of that double-edged sword there. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I've seen people struggle with this. My opinion is that entry level doesn't mean you're going to be completely trained on the job. There are some places that will entertain that and will do that, but that's a very big ask for a company, and especially if it's a smaller company, that costs a lot of money on their side to then bring someone in who has absolutely no relevant experience, and then they're going to invest in that person. It's not to say that it never happens, but you're going to have to rely a lot more on just a resume at that point. You're gonna have to rely on a lot of contacts and connections that way. The truth is that when it comes to entry level roles, and I've hired for them, and I have a baseline of requirements, and that baseline is really just that they have some experience that is relevant to the role. If you want to be a coder and you've never written a line of code, that's a little bit of a big ask. But if I'm looking for an iOS developer and all you've ever written was JavaScript, that is something that I'd be willing to entertain, and I'd work with you to figure out whether you'd be a good fit. It doesn't need to be professional experience. And I think professional experience is a very big umbrella. And so it's easy to interpret what qualifies as professional or not. If you've done freelance work, if you've done contract work, if you've done something for a student group and you didn't get paid, but you did it because you wanted that experience, I would argue that that is probably more professional experience than you realize. And some hiring managers might not agree with me, but I think if you think about the skills that it takes to be able to do something like that, a lot of it lines up exactly with what you typically look for in professional experience anyways. But short of any kind of experience like that, personal projects are the way to go. I mean, I actually have a couple of materials. I don't want to plug myself here by telling you to go check out my YouTube channel or anything. But I do cover, you know, if you are looking for what are the kinds of projects that I should do to stand out, and I've never had professional experience, I cover what those are. And you know, I'll cover a couple of them because I want to make sure I don't forget one. But the essence of it is, you don't need to go and build your own Twitter and say, here, I've built a Twitter to show that I'm a full stack developer. And in fact, a lot of people overwhelm themselves by thinking too large. So think small and think about the things behind Twitter that make Twitter what it is, right? There's a front end that presents information, and it's dynamic, and it's, you know, it scrolls for, it infinitely scrolls, and there's all these kind of, you know, like I said, dynamic elements that populate. So just build something that shows that skill set. It doesn't have to be Twitter, and it doesn't have to have a back end, but if you can show something that does that, that shows that side of it. But then show your database skill sets by just building a database and showing what you know about stored procedures and how to structure information so that different tables get updated upon inserts and those kinds of things. And then show a business layer logic that, or a business logic layer that has those different kind of elements that would be behind that, right? You can all of a sudden start seeing that you have not just one project called a Twitter clone, but you can actually have 3, 4, 5 different projects, all from trying to build your own Twitter. And then you can get a 6th one just by combining it all together to be your Twitter clone. But the point is, smaller things are easier to accomplish, and it doesn't need to be the full scope of it. So think in those ways. Another way that I would look at how you can build a portfolio pretty quickly is looking at different types of projects. So blogging type of projects where it's like you have a place to upload or input text, and then it gets persisted to a database, and then it gets presented. That's one type of project. I wouldn't make 5 different types of blogs. Doing it once is great. Do something that shows that you can work with an API, or that you can you know, interpret data and filter it and kind of do some data manipulation. Do something that is, you know, a little bit out of the box, like work with different third-party tools or SDKs, or do some graphics manipulation, you know, just again, to kind of cover a wider breadth of skill sets. I love when I see people who built games, because when you build a game, there's a lot of different ways that you have to think that you don't normally do when you're just building an application. So if you've already built 1 or 2 applications, don't build a 3rd. Do something fun and build a game, and you'll actually enjoy that whole experience. But at the end of the day, if I see a candidate that doesn't have any professional experience but has quite a lot of different projects that show a lot of different skill sets, that's really going to stand out to me. And so that's one of the reasons why you should definitely have a portfolio.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Very helpful. Do you have some advice for job seekers who maybe have an extended career break and they want to relaunch their career? This individual specifically is looking on the product side, but if you have advice, more for generally speaking, that as well.
Yeah, I think, I mean, other than what I've already covered in terms of like a portfolio and all that stuff, I think the next thing that I would really mention is leveraging your network. And I think that forget COVID for a second, but rewind 2.5 years ago, and even then, it was very, very easy to start building really valuable connections and network with people. There's a lot of different meetups now that are focused on one technology or one language or one stack. There are a lot of different Slack communities, there's meetups, and now they've all kind of become more virtual meetups. And so it's really easy to connect with really good people. And the worst thing that you can do when you're connecting with someone is say, hey, I'm trying to do this. What can you do for me? You don't enter into a relationship asking something from someone. But what you do is build a reputation with them. And if they start to see that, hey, this is someone who actually knows their stuff and they can do this kind of thing. And yeah, they've been out of it, but they can get back into it pretty quickly. That's when you start to really be able to leverage those connections. Because I'll tell you that the first thing that I do whenever I'm recruiting for any kind of role is I don't put a job post up. I go and I ask my team members and I say, do you know anyone who might fit into this role? A lot of companies will offer bonuses to employees that do refer someone. And it's a really good team building thing because it shows you if someone wants to make a referral about someone that they know, they're trying to invest in the company that they're a part of, which means that they're feeling a sense of loyalty towards that organization. They're connected, so they're reinvesting in the group, but they're also, incentivized to do so by getting a bonus. So that's where leveraging connections is really, really important. And it's something that a lot of people don't tap into. They just think that, let me just go and apply. But a lot of people, I think about half my team was built through one referral or another, and the other half was through just more like cold applications. So I'd say that that's probably your best way to go, regardless of industry or role, is building out that network and being an active part of that community.
Fantastic. This is a question. I think you covered a little bit of it, but maybe you can provide a little bit more insight. When do you think that job seekers should start to work on their portfolio? So they might have really beginner skills. Should they showcase that, or should they wait for their skills to be developed a bit more?
I would say do it. So going back to what projects you should have, a portfolio is a project. And so James did that on his, and the example I showed. So if you don't have any, make that your first project. And it doesn't have to be great. Here's the weird truth of having a website. You think that the second you put it online, it's flooded with views. It's not. You might get one, you might get two, and it most likely might be your parents that are proud of you. So you really don't have to worry too much about who's seeing it and is it going to embarrass you or not. But start small and iterate on it and do it in small increments, and you'll start to build something that you'll start to feel more and more proud of. And the nice part is that as soon as you have, this is the whole agile approach, right? As soon as you have something that you can show, it's not about going and applying for jobs. The next thing is really take your portfolio and send it to people that you know and trust so that you can get their feedback. Some of the things that I learned early on in my career, it was because I shared it with one developer or another, and they would say, oh, did you use this kind of system, or did you use this kind of algorithm, or did you use this? And I didn't. And I would keep what they said in my mind, and I'd go home and I'd implement what they said because I realized that they actually had the better approach. And so you can learn a lot in a very organic way just by having people give you feedback on what you've already done. But I would say that if you don't have a portfolio right now, it's definitely, again, it's not going to be the thing that lands you a job. It's not a guaranteed thing, but it is someone that's going to allow you to exercise new skills and give you something that allows you to get feedback and then use that to grow from.
Great. So this next question is a very, very targeted question, but I think it can apply to many individuals who maybe don't have a ton of experience in tech or in programming. So this individual is actually a professional classical musician, and they have a lot of teaching experience. So they want to be sure that their resume highlights how they feel about their career in music and prepare them well for their new path. So they were looking for a little bit of, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to scroll and it scrolling up and down. Be sure that the resume highlights how they feel that their career in music helped to prepare them for their new path. What kind of balance should they aim for in their resume so that they can still highlight their progress as a programmer? So I guess we can really just say there's lots of people out there that have a background that's not always in technology, and how can they make that balance in their resume?
Yeah. I love that question. So 15 years ago, 16 years ago, when I was getting started, that would have been a much harder thing to answer. Today, it's a lot easier because a lot of other people are in that boat. When I was getting started, most of the people who are in my shoes as a hiring manager had CS degrees or had been coding for so long that they were otherwise, very like engineering focused and had that right mindset. And so having to prove myself was a lot harder. Today, there's a lot more people who came from a different background and they've changed positions, they've changed roles, they've changed careers. And so they're a lot more empathetic to people who are making that kind of shift. It doesn't mean that everyone's going to be like that, and it doesn't mean you're not going to run into friction. But the point is that don't be worried too much about that, and don't shy away from it either. But what I would encourage you to do is find a way to generalize the skills that you have to what you're now looking to do. So I think it said that you were a teacher, and so for me that just means you've got experience in leadership, maybe some management, but maybe some project management and organization. There's a lot of different very valuable skills in that, and that translates well. But me being the hiring manager, I'm not going to be the one who's going to be able to translate it as well as you can. So you want to do the lifting there, and you want to be able to translate that in a way that's meaningful to the hiring manager. So take those skills that you've learned and you've accrued, because they account for something, and they're very valuable. Especially, anyone who's been, for example, in the retail industry, in the customer focused industry, where they're actively working with customers. There's a reason why my customer slide looked the way it was, and it's that customers are very, very difficult to work with, because you can never really predict what they want, and sometimes they don't even know what they want. And that applies in the software world, it applies in the restauranting world, it applies in every single space. I think the quote is that the worst part about business are the customers. And so the thing is that if you've worked directly with customers, that counts for a lot. And I would not shy away from that. And I would highlight that, but again, highlight it in a way that is meaningful. So if you're coming from the restaurant world, I wouldn't focus too much on the restauranting aspects of it, but just focus on the fact that you've worked with customers and you've de-escalated situations, or you figured out a way to do different kind of customer management techniques. As far as your resume goes and what you list on it, I think that you definitely want to prioritize the stuff that is going to be more immediately relevant, that being the technology stuff that you've done. But what you can do is summarize the other stuff, the other areas of your career. It doesn't have to be, when I was in high school, the way that they taught us to build resumes is every single place that you've worked at is one entry, and you give the dates, and that's about it. You give a bit of a description, but it doesn't need to be that way. You can be, again, think more, you want to follow that recipe structure, but you want to also do the work for the hiring manager so they can get a sense of who you are. So you can summarize your time as a vocalist, or whatever other role that you've had, as one entry, and just cover the skills and the accomplishments that you've had in a more general way that's meaningful. And then as you start building up more technical experience, that'll eventually take over. My career of 16-ish years, I've been at can't remember off the top of my head, but so let's say 6 or 7 companies. I only have 3 or 4 companies listed on my resume today. At the top, I have a summary that kind of gives an overall sense of my qualifications. And I've broken them down into different categories in technical and leadership, strategy. And so I break it down in those ways. And that way, anyone who's looking at my resume, they'll say, okay, they get a sense from me as in terms of a summarized version of my career. They see some of the more relevant areas that I've worked that will be meaningful to them. And that way they get a sense of who I am. But I'd say that that's probably the best way to go.
Awesome. Thank you. So you guys, we are kind of approaching the last few minutes. There's a few things that I want to cover before we end the event.